He unites with Fidel Castro and the others. He's shocked to see how small the group is.
Only 17 of the original 82 men on board the Granma, amongst them Che and the Castro brothers, Fidel and Raul, were amongst the survivors. The invasion was such a disaster that news reports initially sent out the news that Fidel and Che had died.
Fidel Castro, Che, and the others regroup and move towards the Sierra Maestra mountain range.
The Sierra Maestra was the mountain range nearest the coast where they landed and where Fidel planned to base his guerrilla movement.
The Sierra Maestra is home to renegades, smugglers, and a hardy peasant population.
Neither were I or the other farmers in the area aware that there was a revolutionary movement taking place. It took us by surprise. I knew nothing about politics.
16-year-old Dario Ramirez, nicknamed Benigno, works on his father's farm in the Sierra Maestra.
They arrived at my home to ask for food, and we gave them some. But I didn't help them because I sympathized with them. I helped them out of fear of repression.
The strangers in the mountains are viewed with suspicion.
Who are these bearded, smelly strangers with guns, making a noisome intrusion into their lives?
Fidel Castro tries to convince the peasants to side with him and his men.
He decided to impress upon the peasants that he would bring about an agrarian reform. And he did that by basically stealing a bunch of cows from landowners and liberating them and handing them over to the area's peasants. That was a fairly popular move.
Castro decides it's time to make the rebel presence felt and plans for an attack on an army outpost in the area. Che is heading for his first battle. On January 22, 1957, the rebels stage an ambush on an army patrol. As the first shots ring out, Che is face to face with the enemy.
He shot him when he saw him drop, and he seemed to be gauging his own reactions to see how he felt about it. And he felt fine. He felt fine.
The small group is now faced with having to execute one of their own.
A traitor, a man called Eutimio Guerra, one of their first collaborators, was discovered to be a spy. Fidel sentenced this man to death. No one ever said who had executed Eutimio Guerra, but in Che's personal diary, it emerged that he had, and he described it in vivid detail. Taking the man's possessions from him, exchanging words from him, and then Che stepping up to his side. There was a thunderstorm breaking just then, and placing a revolver at his temple and blowing his brains out, the 25 caliber revolver. Che inspected the entry and exit wound, very much the doctor writing down that he had slept fine with what he had done. From that moment on, Che changed.
War is harsh, and at a time when the enemy was intensifying its aggressiveness, one could not tolerate even the suspicion of treason.
I don't know the final tally of execution victims of Che Guevara, but it was certainly dozens.
February 17, 1957. Hiding out in the Cuban jungle, a small band of revolutionaries led by Fidel Castro contends with the constant threat of army ambushes and traitors in their midst. But thanks in part to Che Guevara's ruthlessness, the group is slowly gaining in strength and fierce reputation. Fidel Castro's troops and their exploits soon catch the attention of the world press.
A newspaper editor named Herbert Matthews from the New York Times, who had got smuggled up to meet him. Castro gave the impression to Herbert Matthews that he had like 100 to 150 men.
In fact, the mighty rebel army is made up of only 20 men. When the article is published a month later, it confirms that Fidel and Che have survived the initial attack by Batista's forces, and that their movement is thriving in the Sierra Maestra. In response, Batista deploys 1,500 more soldiers to hunt down the rebels.
On March 25th, Batista's army arrived at my house. They surrounded my home and opened fire because I had been reported as a collaborator with the rebel army. They killed my wife. That's why I joined the rebel army.
Meanwhile, July 26th urban members sign up reinforcements. One of the new city recruits is Chuck Ryan, a 19-year-old American attending high school at Guantanamo Bay, where his father works as a U.S. Marine Corps medic.
We had a large society with the Cubans. We were all friends, and we went to their weddings and their baptisms and things like that. Well, I offered to help them to get gun supplies to fight against the dictatorship.
Soon, Chuck and 2 other teenagers from Guantanamo are invited to join the rebels.
So we talked about it and settled a few things and left letters for our parents.
The American teens, along with 50 other new recruits, are taken into the Sierra Maestra. One of the first people they meet is Che.
I think that the real reason they said Che was those men that we came with, many of them were very ill because it took us 30 hours of walking to get up those hills with those packs.
There are other American volunteers. One of them is 18-year-old Don Saldini.
Whole rebel army, including Fidel, Che, Raul, and my group, was estimated to consist of 300 men.
Life within the rebel camp is not easy.
I had no soles on my boots. We ate when we could. Sometimes we didn't have water. We marched for a couple of 100 miles over the mountains. I was plagued with dysentery and what have you.
In the jungles of Cuba, the rebels are vulnerable to all types of health problems, which Che treats.
We would get large infected mosquito bites on our legs and things. And he would come over and take the scabs off and put sulfa powder on there.
Men were pretty scared of being treated by him. They called him Doctor Sacamuelas, tooth puller. He was pretty rough. He was not known for his delicacy.
Along with his doctor's duties, Che proves himself repeatedly on the battlefield. It's been said, in more hands-on fashion than Fidel.
Che was a true model in front of us. While Fidel looked for a place of refuge to hide himself, Che was bare-chested. He always rushed to the front lines during battles.
His willingness to confront death, to take life, to risk his own life, came together to form a charisma that was highly unusual and which gave him an almost legendary reputation. And he emerged as a man which others feared and also respected and admired.
Seeing how well Che conducts himself in battle, Fidel promotes him to commandant on July 12, 1957, and gives him his first military command of 75 men, known as Column Number 4.
The vanity which we all have in us made me the proudest man in the world that day.
There were those who fell under his leadership and charisma, and particularly very young boys, you have to call them, 15, 16-year-olds. Some of them were runaways who became his disciples, and they became known as Los Cachorros del Che, Che's cubs. He was everything to them, an older brother, a father, a guerrilla leader, an instructor, very much the ideologue. He gave them literacy lessons. He wanted them to read and write.
Others do their best not to attract his attention.
He could punish someone for 3 to 6 days without food for something minor. This character and furious discipline of his makes me believe it was fear that we had of him. We feared that he would impose upon us a punishment.